Abandoned wife. SHOCKS. CEO with identical triplets on stage. Hey beautiful souls, welcome back to Alcote Stories, the place where hearts break, heal, and find their way home again. Tonight's story isn't just about love. It's about what happens when love is abandoned, tested, and then unexpectedly resurrected. What would you do if the man who shattered you suddenly stood before you, speechless, staring at three identical faces that mirrored his own? Before we dive into this emotional journey, tell me in the comments, where in the world are you watching from? And what time is it there right now? I love knowing how far our family of story lovers stretches across the globe. Now get cozy, maybe grab a tissue, because this story, it's going to pull on every string your heart has. Let's begin. It started with sirens, flashing red lights, and the bitter scent of burnt rubber in the Ira, moment that should have been defined by pain. But for Nathaniel Carter, it became the start of everything. He was rushed into the ER after a minor car crash, conscious, annoyed, and bleeding from a gash above his brow. But it wasn't the injury that stole his breath. It was the woman who leaned over him, placing a steady hand on his chest as she checked his vitals. Her voice, calm as falling rain, told him to breathe, to relax, that he'd be okay. And somehow, he believed her more than the machine beeping beside him. Her skin glowed beneath the hospital's harsh white lights, her brown eyes steady and impossibly deep, her braided hair tucked behind one ear as she focused on cleaning his wound. Nate had been in countless boardrooms, seen models, socialites, and millionaires, but nothing had ever looked like her. She wasn't polished for show. She was raw beauty wrapped in strength, patience, and quiet grace. Even with pain pulsing at his temple and blood seeping into the collar of his suit, he couldn't tear his eyes away. He tried to speak, but the words felt clumsy in his mouth. What did a man like him even say to a woman like her? "You're lucky," she said softly, her gloved hands moving efficiently. Could have been worse. Her tone was professional, but there was a warmth beneath it, a sincerity that wrapped around him tighter than the hospital blanket draped across his chest. Nate, CEO of Carter Innovations, a man feared in his world for his icy deals and sharp tongue, found himself speechless in front of a nurse. He watched her every move, the way she double-checked his vitals, the way her fingers lingered just a second longer to make sure he was comfortable. "What's your name?" he asked, his voice rasping. She hesitated, then offered, "Alana." It fit her, soft but strong, elegant but grounded. He said her name again under his breath like a secret prayer. She glanced at him, her expression unreadable, clearly used to patience, trying to flirt. But this wasn't that, not really. Nate wasn't trying to impress her. In fact, for once in his life, he wasn't trying at all. He was just captivated. When she finished cleaning his wound, she stood upright, jotting notes into the chart without another glance, but he kept watching her, memorizing the slope of her jaw, the faint shadow under her eyes, the way her scrubs clung to her curves but didn't define her. He wondered if she always carried herself this way, with purpose, with quiet fire. The ER was chaotic, voices rising, patients moaning, phones ringing, but with her beside him, the noise dulled, as if the world had hushed to make space for this moment. "You've got a mild concussion," she said, checking his pupils with a small flashlight. He winced slightly but didn't pull away. "And a few stitches. You'll live." She almost smiled, and that half-smile undid something in him. He'd been drifting for years, lost in mergers and deadlines, in women who wanted his money but not his heart, in rooms full of people who laughed at his jokes but didn't know him at all. But this woman, this stranger in blue, scrubs made him feel seen. She called over another nurse to assist, clearly preparing to move on, and panic stirred in his chest. He didn't want her to leave. Not yet. "Alana," he said again, stopping her. "Do you always fix people like this?" She tilted her head, bemused. "Like what?" Like you're the calm in the middle of their storm." The other nurse raised a brow, but Alana didn't laugh or blush. She simply said, "It's my job." But Nate knew this wasn't just a job for her. It was who she was. She started to walk away, but he reached out, just lightly touching her wrist. "Thank you," he said, meaning more than just for the bandages. She nodded once and left, disappearing behind the curtain. He laid back on the bed, staring at the ceiling, feeling oddly hollow without her near. For the next 20 minutes, doctors came and went. Papers were signed, questions were asked, but none of it mattered. His mind was on Alana. Who was she? Did she always work the night shift? Did she know what she did to people when she walked into a room? When they discharged him, he left reluctantly, stepping out into the cold night air with a stitched forehead and a strange tightness in his chest. He didn't believe in love at first sight, not really, but something had happened in that ER, something he couldn't explain or shake. Nate climbed into the back of his waiting car, but his reflection in the window didn't look like the same man who walked in earlier. He looked, shaken, awakened, curious. Her name echoed in his ears like a song, Alana. For the rest of the night, he couldn't sleep. His assistant called about a meeting, but he didn't hear her. He just kept wondering, what would it take to see her again? What kind of man would he have to become to be worthy of someone like her? Because in that brief moment, while blood dripped and sirens wailed, he hadn't just seen a nurse. He'd seen a woman who made him want to heal for the first time. Not physically, but from the inside out. And though she may not have known it, Alana Brooks had just become the beginning of a story neither of them could have written alone. The night bled into morning, and Nathaniel Carter hadn't closed his eyes once. Alana's name had taken up permanent residence in his thoughts, pulsing like a heartbeat against the silence of his penthouse walls, echoing in the spaces where ambition used to live. He rose early, far before sunrise, abandoning a pile of untouched reports and neglected calls, instead finding himself in front of a florist shop before they'd even flipped the open sign. He waited patiently, something he rarely did, and when the doors unlocked, he walked in like a man on a mission. He didn't know her favorite flowers, didn't even know her last name, but instinct guided him to a bouquet of soft white lilies and lilac-tipped tulips, gentle, unassuming, elegant, just like the woman who had altered the course of his world in a single night. When he stepped back into the hospital later that morning, dressed in a charcoal overcoat and holding the flowers with a nervous tightness he hadn't felt since his first board meeting, the nurses at the front desk raised their eyebrows. He ignored the curious glances, scanning every hallway for a glimpse of her. Eventually, he spotted her across the room, helping a child into a wheelchair, her eyes warm and voice patient, even as she moved quickly through the chaos. Something about the way she bent down to the child's level, her hand on his back as she reassured him, made Nate's chest tighten again only. This time, it wasn't confusion. It was admiration, plain and raw. When she finally looked up and noticed him approaching, her expression flickered with surprise, maybe even hesitation. "Mr. Carter," she greeted, adjusting her name badge. "Back so soon?" He offered the bouquet, his voice softer than usual. "Just Nate, and these are for you." Her hands paused mid-motion. "Is this about the treatment yesterday?" she asked carefully, unsure whether he was mocking, flirting, or simply insane. "No," he said, his eyes steady. "It's about the effect you had on me." She blinked, clearly unused to flattery that wasn't coated in expectation. He saw her debating whether to accept the flowers, but after a few seconds she reached for them gently. "Thank you," she said, quieter than before. "They're beautiful." "So are you," he replied before he could stop himself. She looked at him then, really looked past the suit and the status, into the man underneath. "You're not used to hearing no, are you?" she asked, a teasing smirk tugging at the corner of her mouth. "Not really," he admitted with a chuckle. "But I'm willing to learn." She shook her head, amused and guarded all at once. "What do you want, Nate?" He glanced around the busy hallway. "Coffee. Just coffee. 1 hour. No suits, no business talk, just two people being honest." She didn't answer right away, but he saw something soften in her eyes, a layer peeling back. "I get off at 8, she said. "There's a diner 2 blocks down. I like the corner booth by the window." And with that, she walked away, her braid swinging behind her, leaving him standing there with a silly grin on his face. 8 couldn't come fast enough. When she finally slid into the booth later that night, her scrubs exchanged for a light grey cardigan and jeans, Nate felt like the universe had reset itself around her. They sat across from each other, the smell of cinnamon and fresh coffee between them, and for once he didn't feel the need to impress. She laughed when he confessed he didn't even like coffee but ordered it just to sit with her, and he laughed when she admitted she didn't trust men who wore watches that cost more than a car. The conversation started light, floating on jokes and awkward pauses. But somewhere between sips and glances, the truth started to spill. Nate found himself talking about his late mother, the pressure of inheriting a company before he was ready, how success had isolated him more than it rewarded him. Alana listened, not with sympathy, but with understanding, like someone who knew exactly what it felt like to wear armor every day. Then it was her turn. She spoke about growing up in a house where silence was safer than speaking, about a father who left and a mother who worked double shifts to keep the lights on. She told him about working 3 jobs through nursing school, about how patients sometimes treated her like furniture, invisible and replaceable. Her voice dipped lower as the words poured out, like she hadn't meant to share so much, but couldn't stop once she started. "I'm not used to being treated like I matter," she whispered, her eyes downcast, fingers circling the rim of her mug. For a second, Nate forgot how to breathe. "You do," he said, with no theatrics, no polished lines, just the truth, plain and unpolished. Her eyes met his, and in that quiet moment, something shifted, something fragile and rare. The diner around them disappeared. Time blurred. 2 strangers, with pasts too heavy for their shoulders, leaned in closer, not for a kiss, but for something deeper. Recognition. She smiled then, not the polite one from earlier, but a real one that touched her whole face, and he knew he'd seen something precious, something most people never got to witness. The waitress came by to refill their cups, but neither of them noticed. They sat in that booth for hours, long after the sky turned black and the streets grew quiet. Eventually, Alana glanced at the time and sighed. "I should go. Early shift tomorrow." He nodded, reluctant. "Will I see you again?" She stood, grabbing her coat. "That depends. Are you always this honest?" He smiled, rising too. "Only when I'm with someone who makes me want to be." She paused, looked back at him, and with a subtle nod said, "Then maybe you will." And just like that, she disappeared into the night, leaving behind the warmth of her coffee cup, the scent of her skin on the cushion, and a piece of herself lodged inside Nate Carter's guarded heartbreak, where it didn't ask for permission, but fit like it always belonged. The night bled into morning, and Nathaniel Carter hadn't closed his eyes once. Alana's name had taken up permanent residence in his thoughts, pulsing like a heartbeat against the silence of his penthouse walls, echoing in the spaces where ambition used to live. He rose early, far before sunrise, abandoning a pile of untouched reports and neglected calls, instead finding himself in front of a florist shop before they'd even flipped the open sign. He waited patiently, something he rarely did, and when the doors unlocked, he walked in like a man on a mission. He didn't know her favorite flowers, didn't even know her last name, but instinct guided him to a bouquet of soft white lilies and lilac-tipped tulips, gentle, unassuming, elegant, just like the woman who had altered the course of his world in a single night. When he stepped back into the hospital later that morning, dressed in a charcoal overcoat and holding the flowers with a nervous tightness he hadn't felt since his first board meeting, the nurses at the front desk raised their eyebrows. He ignored the curious glances, scanning every hallway for a glimpse of her. Eventually, he spotted her across the room, helping a child into a wheelchair, her eyes warm and voice patient, even as she moved quickly through the chaos. Something about the way she bent down to the child's level, her hand on his back as she reassured him, made Nate's chest tighten, again only this time. It wasn't confusion. It was admiration, plain and raw. When she finally looked up and noticed him approaching, her expression flickered with surprise, maybe even hesitation. "Mr. Carter," she greeted, adjusting her name badge. "Back so soon?" He offered the bouquet, his voice softer than usual. "Just Nate. And these are for you." Her hands paused mid-motion. "Is this about the treatment yesterday?" she asked carefully, unsure whether he was mocking, flirting, or simply insane. "No," he said, his eyes steady. "It's about the effect you had on me." She blinked, clearly unused to flattery that wasn't coated in expectation. He saw her debating whether to accept the flowers, but after a few seconds she reached for them gently. "Thank you," she said, quieter than before. "They're beautiful." "So are you," he replied before he could stop himself. She looked at him then, really looked past the suit and the status, into the man underneath. "You're not used to hearing no, are you?" she asked, a teasing smirk tugging at the corner of her mouth. "Not really," he admitted with a chuckle, "but I'm willing to learn." She shook her head, amused and guarded all at once. "What do you want, Nate?" He glanced around the busy hallway. "Coffee. Just coffee. 1 hour. No suits, no business talk, just two people being honest." She didn't answer right away, but he saw something soften in her eyes, a layer peeling back. "I get off at 8, she said. "There's a diner 2 blocks down. I like the corner booth by the window." And with that, she walked away, her braid swinging behind her, leaving him standing there with a silly grin on his face. 8 couldn't come fast enough. When she finally slid into the booth later that night, her scrubs exchanged for a light grey cardigan and jeans, Nate felt like the universe had reset itself around her. They sat across from each other, the smell of cinnamon and fresh coffee between them, and for once he didn't feel the need to impress. She laughed when he confessed he didn't even like coffee but ordered it just to sit with her, and he laughed when she admitted she didn't trust men who wore watches that cost more than a car. The conversation started light, floating on jokes and awkward pauses, but somewhere between sips and glances, the truth started to spill. Nate found himself talking about his late mother, the pressure of inheriting a company before he was ready, how success had isolated him more than it rewarded him. Alana listened, not with sympathy, but with understanding, like someone who knew exactly what it felt like to wear armor every day. Then it was her turn. She spoke about growing up in a house where silence was safer than speaking, about a father who left and a mother who worked double shifts to keep the lights on. She told him about working 3 jobs through nursing school, about how patients sometimes treated her like furniture, invisible and replaceable. Her voice dipped lower as the words poured out, like she hadn't meant to share so much, but couldn't stop once she started. "I'm not used to being treated like I matter," she whispered, her eyes downcast, fingers circling the rim of her mug. For a second, Nate forgot how to breathe. "You do," he said, with no theatrics, no polished lines, just the truth, plain and unpolished. Her eyes met his, and in that quiet moment, something shifted, something fragile and rare. The diner around them disappeared. Time blurred. 2 strangers with pasts too heavy for their shoulders leaned in closer, not for a kiss, but for something deeper. Recognition. She smiled then, not the polite one from earlier, but a real one that touched her whole face, and he knew he'd seen something precious, something most people never got to witness. The waitress came by to refill their cups, but neither of them noticed. They sat in that booth for hours, long after the sky turned black and the streets grew quiet. Eventually, Alana glanced at the time and sighed. "I should go. Early shift tomorrow." He nodded, reluctant. "Will I see you again?" She stood, grabbing her coat. "That depends. Are you always this honest?" He smiled, rising too. "Only when I'm with someone who makes me want to be." She paused, looked back at him, and with a subtle nod said, "Then maybe you will." And just like that, she disappeared into the night, leaving behind the warmth of her coffee cup, the scent of her skin on the cushion, and a piece of herself lodged inside Nate Carter's guarded heartright, where it didn't ask for permission, but fit like it always belonged. The door of the diner closed softly behind her, and Nate stood there for a few moments longer, staring through the glass, watching Alana's silhouette dissolve into the streetlight-glazed sidewalk, the rhythm of her footsteps still echoing in his chest. He should have gone home, should have driven back to his towering penthouse, where the city blinked beneath his windows like constellations, but instead he walked aimlessly, silently replaying every word she had said, every glance, every vulnerable pause she'd gifted him like fragile truth, wrapped in quiet bravery. The next day, he found himself outside the hospital again, Not with flowers this time, but with takeout coffee and a heart racing like it had something to lose. When she saw him waiting by the parking lot, a crooked smile teased her lips, and she shook her head as she walked toward him, arms folded, already expecting his charm. "Persistent, aren't you?" she said. "No," he answered with a grin, "just invested." What started as casual meetings quickly melted into something deeper: midnight, walks through empty parks, conversations under faded moonlight, silent moments where words weren't needed because the air between them carried everything unsaid. Nate was different, with her gentler, slower, as if every gesture mattered. His world of sharp suits and sharper deadlines faded whenever she was near. He'd always lived like time was a weapon counted in contracts, flights, meetings, but Alana slowed him down, not in a way that dulled him, but in a way that let him finally breathe. With her, he learned to listen, not just hear. He'd watch her laugh with his driver, talk to a homeless man without flinching, cry during a movie she'd seen 10 times, and every time he saw a layer of her soul she never tried to hide. The woman the world often overlooked had become the only person he couldn't stop seeing. He invited her into his life, but not like he did with others, not just to impress. He showed her his mother's old piano, the photo albums he never opened, the broken sketchbook he kept from college when he still thought he'd be an artist. She didn't ask for the expensive dinners or the private jets. She just wanted his honesty, his presence, his heart uncluttered by ego. He gave it, piece by piece, and never once did she misuse it. She, in return, brought him into her world, not the glamorous kind, but the real one. The worn-out couch in her apartment, the home-cooked meals she insisted on making herself, the way she talked about her patients like they were family. He met her neighbors, her goddaughter, even her grumpy cat. It wasn't flashy, but it was warmed. It was more home than any mansion he'd ever owned. One night, they danced in her living room, barefoot and swaying to a scratchy old record, her head resting on his chest, and he whispered, "This feels like forever." She looked up, and for a heartbeat, he saw it: the fear of trust, of falling again. But she didn't pull away. She held him tighter. Weeks passed, and their love deepened like roots growing in quiet soil. He began canceling meetings just to surprise her at work. She started leaving him handwritten notes in his coat pocket. He stopped pretending around others, stopped caring what the world thought of him when she was near. Then came the day he knew, absolutely knew, he couldn't imagine a life without her. He rented a private garden in the hills, a place wrapped in ivy and mist, with stone paths that curved around sleepy fountains. At dusk, he led her there, eyes blindfolded, hands shaking not from nerves, but from the weight of hope. When he pulled the blindfold away, she gasped softly at the candlelit path ahead, petals scattered like dreams underfoot. "What is this?" she asked, her voice breathless. He didn't speak. He simply walked her down the trail until they reached the heart of the garden, where a circle of lanterns flickered against the falling dark. Then he turned to her, dropping to one knee, and took her hand as if it were the most sacred thing he'd ever held. "I've spent years chasing perfection in my work, in myself, in people who wore masks that matched mine," he said, voice trembling with emotion. "But then I met you and you ruined all of that, in the best way. You're not perfect, Alana, but you're real. And I don't need a perfect woman. I need you. Just you." Her hand flew to her mouth, tears already streaming, knees buckling with disbelief. "Nate," she whispered, but he held her hand firmer. "I want mornings with you, fights and makeups, ugly crying and soft laughter. I want a life that feels like us." From his pocket, he pulled a simple, elegant ring, nothing flashy, just gold wrapped around a small sapphire, the exact shade of midnight. "Say yes," he pleaded, "and I'll spend every day earning it." For a moment, silence stretched between them, quiet but thunder-roused. Then she fell to her knees too, cupping his face, her own tears falling onto his cheeks. "You already have," she said. And when their lips met, it wasn't the kiss of fairy tales or fantasies. It was something deeper, older, like two souls finally remembering the place they once called home. The silence that settled between them that night was heavier than any fight, More suffocating than any scream it was the kind of silence that came when two hearts had said too much in their silence and not enough with their words. The days that followed were colder, stretched in tension so tight it felt like even their shadows had started to sleep in different corners. Nate became more distant, consumed by whispers. He pretended not to believe, but couldn't stop hearing texts from Grant, warning him to protect the company, closed-door conversations with Veronica, layered with smug insinuations, documents sent anonymously to his legal team, containing grainy, out-of-context photos of Alana sitting too close to a male doctor outside the hospital. He didn't confront her immediately. Instead, he watched her too quiet, too distant, his gaze turning suspicious where it used to be soft. Alana noticed. Of course, how could she not? The man who once craved her laugh now flinched when she spoke. The man who once traced every line of her palm now recoiled like her touch burned. Still, she stayed cooking dinner that went cold on the table, leaving notes he no longer read, whispering, "I miss you," to an empty hallway as he locked himself in his study again. One morning, she walked into the room and found him standing over his desk, jaw clenched, holding a torn-open manila envelope. He looked up, eyes stormy, hand trembling. "Tell me this isn't real," he said, voice like ice breaking under pressure. Alana stepped closer, frowning. "What is it?" He threw the photos on the table, images of her and Dr. Pierce, her longtime colleague, sitting at a cafe, laughing. "You lied to me," he said, pain flaring behind every syllable. "You told me I could trust you, and this whole time—" "Nate," she interrupted, stunned. "He's married with 2 kids. He's my friend, not—" "Don't insult my intelligence," he snapped, eyes narrowed. "You played the game well. You played me well." Her breath hitched. "You really think I'm capable of that?" His silence was answer enough. Something cracked inside her, then not. Her pride, not her temper, but her heart. It wasn't just the accusation, it was the fact that he had believed it. That all it took was a few lies and shadows to make him forget every vow they once whispered between kisses. She looked at the man before her, not the one she married, not the one who proposed with trembling hands and tearful eyes, but a stranger shaped by doubt and fear. "After everything," she whispered, voice breaking, "I gave you my soul. You gave me a goodbye." He didn't respond, only turned away, hands on the desk like he needed it to stay standing, and then she saw it, the letter. It was lying beside the photos, written in his own handwriting. "What is that?" she asked. Nate said nothing. Alana stepped forward, picked it up, and began to read. It wasn't long, just a few lines, cold and surgical. "This marriage is no longer serving either of us. I will have my legal team draft a settlement. Please vacate the residence by Friday." Her knees almost buckled. "You wrote this?" she asked, stunned. "You planned to end it before you even asked me." He looked up, guilt momentarily flashing through the cracks. "I didn't know what else to do. This isn't working." "No," she said, voice shaking, tears blurring the ink in her hands. "You didn't fight for us. You just believed what was easiest to believe, that I could hurt you like everyone else." "You don't understand what I'm risking," he said, trying to justify the unjustifiable. "Everything I've built." "You didn't risk me," she snapped, the pain turning into fire. "Not even once." She didn't wait for more excuses. She walked out of that room with her hands shaking and her heart bleeding, grabbing only what she could carry. No suitcase, no jewelry, no trace of the life she'd built in that mansion of glass and stone and empty promises. The security guard at the front gate looked confused as she stepped out in tears, her cardigan draped over her arm, her shoes clicking against the stone like echoes of goodbye. The sky opened up, as if the heavens themselves couldn't bear the weight of her sorrow, and the rain soaked through her clothes within seconds. Still, she didn't stop. She walked until her feet blistered and her tears dried against her cheeks. That night, she slept in a cheap motel, curled up on stiff sheets, clutching the crumpled letter he'd written like it was proof that it hadn't all been a dream. Her phone buzzed with missed calls from friends, but not one from Nate. Not even a single message to ask if she was safe. And in that motel room, surrounded by peeling wallpaper and flickering light bulbs, Alana cried not because he left her, but because he stopped believing in her. That was the true betrayal. She whispered to herself over and over, like a broken lullaby. I trusted you with my soul. You gave me a goodbye. And outside, as thunder rolled and memories screamed louder than the storm, her love story became something else entirely, a wound, a warning, and a war she would now have to survive alone. The motel room was still, the silence broken only by the faint hum of a flickering ceiling fan and the distant sounds of the rain that had soaked her the night before. Alana lay curled beneath the coarse blanket, eyes open but empty, staring at the cracked paint on the ceiling like it held answers to questions her heart no longer had the strength to ask. Her stomach churned, not with hunger, but with something deeper, heavier, something she couldn't name. She hadn't eaten properly in days, hadn't slept more than a few hours since Nate handed her heartbreak in the form of a letter. Her soul ached in places she never knew existed, her mind drifting between the past she once held and the future she now feared. When her alarm buzzed an automatic reminder for her hospital shift, she forced herself up, her limbs moving out of habit, not will. She dressed in her scrubs slowly, eyes dim, lips dry. Her reflection in the mirror almost unrecognizable. She applied a touch of concealer to hide the swelling around her eyes, but no amount of makeup could conceal the sadness carved into her bones. Still she showed up, because that's who she was. She showed up for her patients, for her duty, even when no one showed up for her. The fluorescent lights of the hospital offered no comfort, only a reminder that life moved on, even when your world had collapsed. As she checked charts, smiled weakly at colleagues, and tended to patients with robotic grace, a strange wave of dizziness began to wash over her. Her vision blurred, her hands trembling as she tried to steady herself. She told herself it was exhaustion, maybe dehydration, but when she bent down to help a child reach his teddy bear, a sharp, sudden pain pierced through her abdomen. She gasped, clutching the side of the bed for balance, her heart pounding erratically. A concerned nurse rushed over. "Alana, are you okay?" But Alana couldn't answer. The hallway spun. Her breath came in shallow bursts, and then everything went dark. When she opened her eyes, the ceiling was no longer cracked. Painted was the sterile white of the ER. Monitors beeped softly. A nurse adjusted an IV beside her bed. Confused, Alana tried to sit up, but the nurse gently pressed her shoulder. "Easy, you collapsed." Alana blinked, her voice hoarse. "What happened?" The door opened, and a female doctor entered, clipboard in hand, face kind but cautious. "Alana," she said gently, "we ran some tests after you were brought in, and there's something you need to know." Alana's eyes widened, fear creeping in. "Am I sick?" The doctor gave a small smile. "Number, not sick. But you're pregnant." The words landed like thunder in a quiet church. "Pregnant?" Her lips parted, but no sound came. Her hand instinctively moved to her stomach, as if checking whether the doctor's words had weight. "Two don't understand," she stammered, her mind spinning. "I didn't even—" The doctor continued, voice soft but firm. "There's more." The ultrasound showed 3 heartbeats. Alana's breath caught. 3? The doctor nodded. "You're having triplets." The room suddenly felt too small, the air too thick. Alana's eyes welled, her chest heaving. "Triplets?" she whispered. "But how? How will I do this alone?" Her voice cracked on the last word. Alone. That word echoed louder than anything else. It wasn't just a pregnancy, it was a storm. A future she hadn't planned. A responsibility that multiplied her fears by 3. She tried to process the news, but the weight of it crushed her chest. The betrayal, the heartbreak, the long, cold nights with no arms to hold her, and now 3 lives growing inside her body. Her body trembled as tears slipped down her cheeks. "This can't be real," she whispered, voice breaking. He left me with nothing, and now I'm carrying everything." The nurse brought a cup of water, but her hands were shaking too hard to hold it. Images flashed in her mind, tiny hands, crying babies, empty cribs, bills she couldn't pay, nights where no one came home. She was a nurse, yes, but she was also a woman abandoned in her most vulnerable moment. The doctor tried to reassure her. "You don't have to figure everything out today. You need rest. We'll help you with next steps." But the words barely reached her. The panic had already taken hold. She clutched the sheets like they could ground her, her sobs finally breaking free, raw and childlike. She wasn't crying just for herself anymore. She was crying for the 3 tiny lives inside her who would never know the warmth of their father's arms unless the world somehow shifted again. "I trusted him," she murmured to no one in particular, her voice brittle. "I gave him my love, my truth, and he gave me abandonment and lies." Her heart felt like it was being torn from the inside, not just by emotion, but by reality, by the fear that she would never be enough for 3 souls who deserved everything. She thought of Nate's eye show, blue they were, how they once looked at her like she was the only star in his sky. Now she feared those same eyes would never look at their children, not even once. The doctor stepped out to give her space. Alone again, Alana stared at the monitor beside her bed, the rhythmic sound of the heartbeats thumping through the silence. 3 steady pulses echoing inside her. Life, unasked for, unplanned, but real. She pressed her hand gently to her belly, still flat, still silent, but now sacred. "I don't know how I'll do this," she whispered to the 3 lives growing inside her, "but I swear to you I will." And though her body trembled and her soul felt shattered, somewhere deep within her, something else began to rise. Something fierce, something maternal, something that no betrayal could kill. A new heartbeat of its own. Strength. The days that followed Alana's hospital stay moved in slow, aching waves, each moment tethered to exhaustion, uncertainty, and the weight of what was growing inside her. She counted every heartbeat, every flutter, every small shift in her body, as proof that she was still moving forward even when she didn't know how. Her savings thinned quicker than her patience, but she refused to stop working. She clocked into her hospital shifts with swollen ankles and a heavy belly, hiding her nausea behind practiced smiles, refusing to let anyone see the fear gnawing at her resolve. Her doctor warned her to slow down, but slowing down meant surrender, and surrender was a luxury she couldn't afford. And then, one stormy Tuesday morning, long before the sun could rise, her water broke. Alone in her small apartment, surrounded by unfolded laundry and half-assembled baby furniture, Alana bit down on a towel to keep from screaming as the contractions rocked through her. She called an ambulance between breaths, her voice shaking, her eyes wild with panic. Hours later, in a sterile delivery room filled with masked doctors and blinking machines, Alana brought 3 new lives into the world, 2 boys and a girl, all crying at once, their voices a chaotic chorus of fragile life. She reached out, trembling, to hold them, but her vision blurred and her strength gave way. The last thing she heard before darkness pulled her under was a nurse whispering, "You did it, Mama. They're beautiful." When she awoke, the room was quiet, the babies resting in incubators nearby, tiny and perfect, wrapped like prayers. Tears slipped from the corners of her eyes, not from pain but from disbelief. She whispered their names softly, Isaac, Elias, and Amarian, her voice cracked like breaking glass. They were hers, entirely hers. 3 little miracles born from heartbreak. The days that followed were a blur of feedings, nurse check-ins, and worry. Amari had breathing issues. Elias couldn't hold milk. Isaac cried endlessly. Alana slept in a stiff chair beside them, holding 1 baby in each arm, the 3rd resting on her chest, her hospital gown stained with formula and tears. Discharge day came too fast. No fancy nursery. No balloons. No father's arms waiting outside. Just a taxi ride to her tiny apartment, now crowded with second-hand cribs and diaper boxes donated by her co-workers. And so began the long nights. The unforgiving, soul-stretching nights that taught her strength wasn't found in muscle sit, lived in rocking chairs at 3 a.m., in cold coffee at dawn, in lullabies whispered through clenched teeth. Alana worked the night shift again 2 weeks later, strapping on a breast pump between rounds, her feet swollen, her spirit fragile but refusing to crack. She'd come home to 3 crying babies, bags under her eyes, and hands that shook from holding too much. Diapers piled in corners, bottles cluttered the sink. Her hair was always in a bun, her clothes never matched. But every morning she kissed their foreheads, whispering, "You're worth it, all of it." Her neighbors sometimes offered help, but Alana politely declined. She'd learned that charity too often came with judgment, and she couldn't afford pity. She kept Nate a secret, even from the birth certificates. She never Googled him, never stalked his socials, never whispered his name aloud. If he wanted out, she'd give him silence. She refused to let her children grow up with the image of a mother begging for love. There were moments when it almost broke her. Nights when all 3 babies cried at once, when the power went out and the bottles wouldn't warm, when her body shook from fatigue and she had to choose between eating or sleeping. She'd sit on the bathroom floor, back against the cold tub, holding Amari to her chest, while Elias wailed and Isaac flailed his arms, and she would cry quiet, breathless sobs that only the walls ever heard. She would whisper to herself, every cry, every bottle, "It's for them. They're all I have left." Her reflection in the cracked mirror scared her sometimes dark circles, hollow cheeks, eyes that had seen too much too soon. But then she'd look at them, her baby sand, remember why she was still standing. Their eyes held pieces of her, but also faint traces of him, Nate's lips, his dimples, that unmistakable blue in Elias's irises. She tried not to notice, but some nights, when she rocked them to sleep, she'd wonder if Nate ever woke up gasping from dreams of her, if he ever stared at his empty apartment and felt the silence crawl over him. But she never reached out, not once, because she promised herself. He left, and she would not hand him the power to hurt her again. She documented their milestones in a worn-out journal: first coups, first smiles, the first time Amari grasped her finger tight enough to make her cry. There was no time for self-pity, no room for regret. Her life now moved to the rhythm of feeding schedules, teething nightmares, and whispered prayers. She found a church daycare that gave her a discount, started meal prepping like a soldier, and learned how to hold all 3 at once with a strength she never thought she had. Love became her fuel, duty became her identity, and survival, that became her triumph. Every diaper change, every midnight feeding, every rushed shower and unpaid bill was a battle, and she was winning, quietly, fiercely, alone, but undefeated. Because Alana wasn't just a woman anymore. She was a mother of 3, a storm in scrubs, a warrior with baby wipes in one hand and purpose in the other. And even though the nights still hurt and the memories of Nate still stung in shadows, she had built something no one could take from her, a life born not from romance, but from resilience. The sun rose on another Monday morning, and this time Alana didn't just rise with it, she rose because of it. The days of living meal to meal and crying on bathroom tiles had not disappeared, but something inside her had evolved beyond survival. Her babies had grown into toddlers, wild and beautiful, each with a personality that lit up her once darkened world. Isaac with his quiet thoughtfulness, Elias with his storm of energy, and Amari, her little mirror, fierce and sweet in equal measure. They became her rhythm, her reason, her revolution. With every milestone they reached, Alana started to believe again, not in fairy tales or second chances, but in herself. She began offering part-time care for elderly neighbors on her days off, using the same gentleness that once calmed the sick at the hospital. Word of her kindness spread like light through a crack in a wall. What started as helping one old veteran bathe and eat turned into weekly schedules, then full-time clients. Her small apartment couldn't hold the weight of growth, so she rented a 2-bedroom with just enough space to fit the kids and a desk. She called her business Tender Hands, because that's what her life had required. Tenderness, not just for others, but for herself. At night, when the triplets slept, tangled together like vines in one bed, Alana pored over YouTube tutorials and business blogs, teaching herself how to manage invoices, apply for licenses, and market services through social media. Her hands never stopped, moving one moment warming bottles, the next replying to client emails, but her eyes began to regain that gleam she hadn't seen since before the betrayal. The pain of the past still lived under her skin, a phantom ache she didn't speak of, but it no longer dictated her every breath. Instead, it became fuel. If love broke me, my children rebuilt me, she would think, every time exhaustion tempted her to quit. Clients loved her not because she wore suits or spoke corporate, but because she listened. She remembered birthdays. She learned the favorite teas of a widowed grandmother and the war stories of a retired Marine. And all the while, her business grew slowly, then steadily, then suddenly. She hired 2 other mothers struggling like she once had, giving them flexible hours and fair wages. By the triplets' 5th birthday, tender hands had a waiting list. She moved again, this time to a small townhouse with a modest garden where her children could run barefoot through grass and mud, laughter echoing like a healing hymn. People in town began to recognize her not as that single mum, but as the woman who built something from nothing. She wore her braids with pride now, walked with poise, and when she passed by mirrors, she no longer looked away. The same woman Nate had once accused of being a gold digger was now independently successful, too proud to accept pity, too strong to crave validation. And yet, the ghost of him still hovered in quiet places whenever Elias scrunched his face in confusion the same way Nate once did, or when a client mentioned the CEO of Whitestone Industries on the news, and her stomach twisted reflexively. Nate's name hadn't passed her lips in years, but his shadow still knew how to knock on the doors of memory uninvited. She never told the triplets about him. When they asked about their father, she simply said, "You have each other, and you have me." They didn't ask twice. The strength she carried was enough for them. At school, teachers commented on how emotionally intelligent the 3 were, how protective they were of one another, and how often they drew pictures of mommy fixing people. She kept their drawings on the fridge like trophies. Every now and then, she allowed herself one night to cry, to grieve not just the man who left, but the woman she used to be, the girl who once thought love was enough, who once believed a kiss in a garden could protect her from betrayal. But those nights were rare now, because most days she was too busy living, building, breathing again. The world had underestimated her, and she'd learned to let that be her secret weapon. She started dressing differently, not for attention, but for power. Silk blouses, tailored pants, earrings her kids picked out with mismatched stones and proud smiles. She carried herself like a woman who had nothing to prove and everything to protect. Clients invited her to speak at local women's conferences, and though her voice trembled at first, she found her rhythm in truth. "Success," she told them once, standing in a school auditorium in front of 50 strangers, "didn't come because I was fearless. It came because I refused to let fear write my ending." The applause was long, heartfelt, and somewhere in the back, a woman sobbed quietly, clutching her own sleeping baby. Alana left the stage with her heart fuller than it had ever been. She still worked long hours, still paid bills late sometimes, still lay awake on rare nights wondering if she was enough. But now, she had proof that she was. 3 living, laughing, growing reasons, and a name she built with her own hands. The town's whispers had changed from gossip to admiration. The nurse who once collapsed under heartbreak was now the woman people trusted with their lives. And though she never expected revenge, her healing itself became the greatest form of it. She never looked for Nate. But the world was small, and fate had a flair for timing. It was a late Thursday afternoon when the cream-colored envelope slid beneath Alana's clinic office door, its gold-embossed seal catching the sunlight like a flash of fate. She stared at it for several long seconds, her fingers hovering before finally reaching down to pick it up. The paper felt expensive, heavy with unspoken intent, and when she broke the seal, her heart gave a traitorous thump. The words inside were simply an elegant invitation to the Whitestone Industries annual tech gala, hosted by none other than CEO Nathaniel Whitestone. Her fingers froze on the name. For a moment, she couldn't breathe. Nate. It had been over 5 years since she'd seen it printed on anything that touched her life. 5 years since she'd buried the ache of his betrayal beneath motherhood, ambition, and silent prayers. And now, out of nowhere, a formal invite addressed to Alana Mayers, founder of Tender Hands Home Care. It didn't say why. It didn't ask for a +1. It didn't mention the past, but the weight of it sat in her lap like a dare. At first, she laughed bitterly, quietly. Was this his attempt at redemption? Or guilt wrapped in glitter? A publicity stunt? A test? She reread it 3 times, searching for hidden meaning. But deep down, she knew exactly what it was. Bait. A quiet lure from a man who'd once walked away from her when she was at her most vulnerable. But if he thought she'd enter that ballroom carrying shame, he hadn't kept up with who she'd become. She folded the letter neatly, set it aside, and took a slow breath. That night, when the triplets fell asleep tangled in the couch after watching a movie, she sat in the quiet and stared at them. Isaac, Elias, Amaritha, lashes fluttering in dreams, their chests rising with innocence. Her heart ached with something ancient and strong. She had vowed to never beg, never look back. But this wasn't about revenge anymore. It was about visibility, truth, power. They deserved to be seen. Not hidden, not denied. And if the world Nate lived in was full of light, then it was time his light met the truth he buried in darkness. She would not go to the gala as a forgotten ex or a quiet guest. She would go as Alana Mayer's CEO, mother, survivor, and she would not walk in alone. The days leading up to the event were filled with silent preparations. She didn't tell her children everything, just that she'd be attending a big event, and they would be part of something special. Amari wanted to wear glitter. Elias insisted on a tiny tie. Isaac, ever the thoughtful one, asked if there would be snacks. She chuckled, choking back nerves. The gown she chose was midnight blue, hugging every curve that motherhood hadn't erased, regal and unapologetic. Her hair, braided high into a crown, shimmered with golden cuffs, and her earrings glinted like stars beside her jawline. She looked in the mirror and saw no remnants of the girl who once stood in the rain with a crumpled letter and an unborn truth. She saw fire. The night of the gala arrived like a storm wrapped in elegance. The venue was a towering marble hall, glittering with chandeliers and polished ambition. Photographers snapped photos. Elite guests swirled champagne in crystal flutes, and the red carpet stretched like a promise of spectacle. Nate was somewhere inside, unaware that the moment he feared and deserved was minutes away. As her car pulled up, Alana stepped out not hesitantly, not nervously, but like a queen entering her own coronation. And behind her, holding her hands, were her 3 children, dressed in matching white and gold. They looked like royalty, like legacy, like justice. Gasps rippled through the crowd. Cameras froze, heads turned, the whispers began, and Alana felt none of it as threatening electricity. Who is she? Is that? Are those? She kept walking, chin high, heart steady, each step a reminder that she was not here to grovel but to unveil. Inside, the gala was a flood of opulence, polished speeches, glass walls, executives toasting empires. Nate stood at the front, delivering a poised address about innovation and global partnerships, his voice polished, his face every bit the media-perfect mogul. But the moment his eyes met the doors as Alana entered with her children, his breath visibly hitched. The mic in his hand lowered a fraction. His composure cracked, and for a split second, the man behind the empire was just a man-face, pale, eyes wide, staring at ghosts he'd tried to erase. Alana didn't flinch. She met his gaze with unwavering calm, leading the children through the crowd. She saw the color drain from his face when Elias turned and smiled his smile. She saw his hand tremble when Isaac looked up, identical blue eyes meeting his, and when Amari clutched her hand and whispered, "Is he the man from your dreams, Mommy?" Alana bent down, kissed her daughter's forehead, and said quietly, "No, baby. He's the man from my past." And then she turned back to Nate, who stood frozen, exposed beneath the glow of chandeliers and the weight of truth. Her voice didn't shake when she walked up to him, extended her hand, and said in front of everyone, "Thank you for inviting us. I thought it was time you met your children," her fingers hovering before finally reaching down to pick it up. The paper felt expensive, heavy with unspoken intent, and when she broke the seal, Her heart gave a traitorous thump. The words inside were simply an elegant invitation to the Whitestone Industries annual tech gala, hosted by none other than CEO Nathaniel Whitestone. Her fingers froze on the name. For a moment, she couldn't breathe. Nate. It had been over 5 years since she'd seen it printed on anything that touched her life. 5 years since she'd buried the ache of his betrayal beneath motherhood, ambition, and silent prayers. And now, out of nowhere, a formal invite addressed to Alana Mayers, founder of Tender Hands Home Care. It didn't say why. It didn't ask for a +1. It didn't mention the past. But the weight of it sat in her lap like a dare. At first, she laughed bitterly, quietly. Was this his attempt at redemption? Or guilt wrapped in glitter? A publicity stunt? A test? She reread it 3 times, searching for hidden meaning. But deep down, she knew exactly what it was. Bait. A quiet lure from a man who'd once walked away from her when she was at her most vulnerable. But if he thought she'd enter that ballroom carrying shame, he hadn't kept up with who she'd become. She folded the letter neatly, set it aside, and took a slow breath. That night, when the triplets fell asleep tangled in the couch after watching a movie, she sat in the quiet and stared at them. Isaac, Elias, Amaritha, lashes fluttering in dreams, their chests rising with innocence. Her heart ached with something ancient and strong. She had vowed to never beg, never look back. But this wasn't about revenge anymore. It was about visibility, truth, power. They deserved to be seen. Not hidden, not denied. And if the world Nate lived in was full of light, then it was time his light met the truth he buried in darkness. She would not go to the gala as a forgotten ex or a quiet guest. She would go as Alana Mayer's CEO, mother, survivor, and she would not walk in alone. The days leading up to the event were filled with silent preparations. She didn't tell her children everything, just that she'd be attending a big event, and they would be part of something special. Amari wanted to wear glitter. Elias insisted on a tiny tie. Isaac, ever the thoughtful one, asked if there would be snacks. She chuckled, choking back nerves. The gown she chose was midnight blue, hugging every curve that motherhood hadn't erased, regal and unapologetic. Her hair, braided high into a crown, shimmered with golden cuffs, and her earrings glinted like stars beside her jawline. She looked in the mirror and saw no remnants of the girl who once stood in the rain with a crumpled letter and an unborn truth. She saw fire. The night of the gala arrived like a storm wrapped in elegance. The venue was a towering marble hall, glittering with chandeliers and polished ambition. Photographers snapped photos. Elite guests swirled champagne in crystal flutes, and the red carpet stretched like a promise of spectacle. Nate was somewhere inside, unaware that the moment he feared and deserved was minutes away. As her car pulled up, Alana stepped out not hesitantly, not nervously, but like a queen entering her own coronation. And behind her, holding her hands, were her 3 children, dressed in matching white and gold. They looked like royalty, like legacy, like justice. Gasps rippled through the crowd. Cameras froze, heads turned, the whispers began, and Alana felt none of it as threatening electricity. Who is she? Is that? Are those? She kept walking, chin high, heart steady, each step a reminder that she was not here to grovel but to unveil. Inside, the gala was a flood of opulence, polished speeches, glass walls, executives toasting empires. Nate stood at the front, delivering a poised address about innovation and global partnerships, his voice polished, his face every bit the media-perfect mogul. But the moment his eyes met the doors as Alana entered with her children, his breath visibly hitched. The mic in his hand lowered a fraction. His composure cracked, and for a split second, the man behind the empire was just a man-face, pale, eyes wide, staring at ghosts he'd tried to erase. Alana didn't flinch. She met his gaze with unwavering calm, leading the children through the crowd. She saw the color drain from his face when Elias turned and smiled his smile. She saw his hand tremble when Isaac looked up, identical blue eyes meeting his, And when Amari clutched her hand and whispered, "Is he the man from your dreams, Mommy?" Alana bent down, kissed her daughter's forehead, and said quietly, "No, baby. He's the man from my past." And then she turned back to Nate, who stood frozen, exposed beneath the glow of chandeliers and the weight of truth. Her voice didn't shake when she walked up to him, extended her hand, and said in front of everyone, "Thank you for inviting us. I thought it was time you met your children. I didn't know you existed," he whispered, voice breaking. "But you look like me. You are me, and I don't deserve you. I don't know how to make this right, but I'd like to try." Silence, for a long, trembling second. And then Elias spoke, simple and pure. "Mommy says we don't need a perfect dad, just a real one." Nate swallowed a sob. Alana looked away, a tear slipping down her cheek, not for pain, but for the beauty of resilience. And the crowd? They rose, one by one, not in gossip or shock, but in stunned respect for the woman who turned betrayal into power and walked into the fire with truth on her heels. Nate couldn't breathe. Sound of the crowd had faded, but the silence inside him screamed. His pulse thundered in his ears as his eyes moved between the three small faces that looked up at him with unknowing patience and reluctant curiosity. The microphone slipped from his hand and hit the stage floor with a sharp metallic thud, but he didn't flinch. It was as if the world had slowed, like time bent to force him to see what he'd spent years pretending didn't exist. His lips parted as if to speak, but all he could manage was a broken whisper. "They're mine?" The words felt foreign in his mouth, unpracticed, dry, like dust after a drought of truth. Isaac tilted his head, a thoughtful expression on his small face, his gaze quiet, but piercing the same gaze Nate had seen in his own reflection, countless times, but never recognized in another until now. Elias shuffled beside his brother, his energy bouncing just beneath the surface, fists clenching and releasing. The same nervous tick Nate had in business meetings he wanted to forget. And Amaridia God, Amari clung to her mother's hand, one foot slightly behind the other, chin lifted just enough to guard her heart, eyes burning with questions she hadn't learned how to ask yet. Nate's knees buckled slightly, and he dropped to a crouch without thinking, bringing himself to their level, as if by instinct his body knew it was time to lower himself, to look up instead of down, to acknowledge what he had denied. "I see you," he choked out, his voice barely a thread. "I see all of you." Isaac blinked slowly, not moving. Elias glanced at his brother and whispered, "Are we supposed to talk?" Nate almost laughed, a broken, unhinged sound, but instead a tear escaped down his cheek. "You don't have to," he replied gently. God, I'm sorry. I didn't know, I didn't ask, I didn't—" His voice cracked again. "You look like me." Amari's voice cut through the air like the first drop of rain after a storm. "Why didn't you want us?" It was soft, but the blow landed like thunder in Nate's chest, ripping through the suit. The ego, the years of pretending everything was clean. He shook his head, eyes wild, palms open, trembling. No, sweetheart. It wasn't that. I didn't know you existed. I was lied to." His eyes darted to Alana, standing statuesque behind the children, her arms crossed not in hostility, but in protection. She didn't speak. She didn't need to. Everything she could have said was written in the years carved into her spine, the worry lines near her eyes, the curve of her back from carrying everything alone. Nate turned back to the kids. "You're real. You're mine." He repeated it, tasting the guilt, the awe, the hollow ache of time lost. He reached out, then stopped himself. Can I hug you?" Silence. The children looked at Alana. She gave the smallest nod. Elias stepped forward, first curious. Braven Nate caught him like a man grabbing the last rope off a cliff. The boy was small and warm, and his arms wrapped around Nate's neck with more innocence than Nate felt he deserved. Isaac followed next, placing a cautious hand on his father's shoulder before allowing himself to lean in. Nate held them both, his eyes closing, heart cracking wide open. "I didn't know I could miss people I've never met," he whispered, "but I did. Somewhere deep down I think I've been missing you every day, and just didn't know it was you." Amari stood still, watching. She didn't move. Nate looked up, meeting her gaze, eyes pleading but patient. "It's okay if you don't want to. I just want you to know you're the bravest girl I've ever seen." Her eyes shimmered, but she stood her ground, her grip still locked with Alana's. "Mommy says I don't have to rush to trust people who hurt her." Nate's breath hitched. "She's right," his voice broke. "You don't. I'm not here to replace anything. I'm here because I finally see what I've missed. I don't deserve your love, but I'd give anything to earn it." Amari took a shaky step forward, not a leap, not a hug. Just one step. Nate nodded, accepting the inch like a gift. He looked up at Alana again. Their eyes met. No words passed, just a history of what-ifs, broken dreams, and the painful symmetry of what stood between them now. She looked different tonight, stronger, sharper, beautiful, in a way that wasn't soft anymore. It was a beauty carved from survival. And yet beneath all that, there was still the woman who once touched his scars in a hospital bed and whispered, "You matter." He saw it now, the weight she'd carried alone, the betrayal she endured, the strength she summoned when he walked away. He wanted to collapse at her feet and beg, but there were children watching now, their children. He wiped his face and stood slowly, pulling back from the boys who still clung to him with hesitant trust. "I want to know them," he said louder now, addressing the entire room. "I want to know every moment I missed, every story, every tear, every laugh. I don't care how long it takes, I'm not running again." A murmur spread through the crowd, not of judgment, but something softer. Maybe awe, maybe respect. Nate turned to Alana. "You don't owe me anything, but if there's any part of you that thinks this story deserves a different ending, I'll wait, as long as it takes." She didn't respond right away. Instead, she stepped forward and placed a gentle hand on Amari's shoulder. "I don't need an ending, Nate," she said quietly. "I'm building a beginning for them. If you want to be in that, you'll have to walk, not talk." And with that, she turned, her triplets beside her, and descended the Stagino in retreat, but in control. Nate watched them go, hands trembling, heart heavier than ever, but for the first time in 5 years, it beat with purpose again. As the golden doors of the ballroom eased, shut behind her, and the whispers multiplied like wildfire in every corner of the grand hall, Alana paused halfway down the marble staircase, her hand gently resting on the banister, heart thudding against her ribs like it was knocking for release. The crowd, now rippling with anticipation and emotion, remained still silent, waiting not for a spectacle, but for something sacred. With her children seated safely just off stage, guarded by the quiet support of a kind stranger from the Gala staff, she turned back, heels echoing as she re-entered the space she hadn't expected to command, but now owned completely. All eyes turned to her. Nate, still rooted near the mic stand, looked stunned, unsure if he should move or stay. But she didn't look at him yet. She reached for the microphone with steady hands, her face lifted toward the sea of judgment, curiosity, and awe. Her voice, when it came, was not loud, but it was full, resonant, carried by every sleepless night and every prayer she whispered into her pillow. "You've seen my children," she began softly, eyes scanning the room. "Now, let me tell you how they came to be." A hushed silence spread like a veil across the crowd. "I was once just a nurse with a full heart and an empty fridge," she said, a small tremble hiding in her throat. "I didn't ask to fall in love with a man who lived in a world built on glass walls and golden lies. But I did, and when I loved him, I gave all of Menno just my heart, but my trust, my dignity, my soul." Her gaze flickered briefly to Nate, then back to the audience. When he left, it wasn't just a breakup, it was an execution. "I was cast out with no warning, no justice, no chance to explain. I was pregnant and alone. I had no money, no family, no apology. All I had were 3 tiny lives fluttering inside me and a broken heart that beat for them." A man in the audience wiped at his cheek. A woman clutched her pearls tighter. Alana continued, voice gaining quiet force. "There were nights I fed them and didn't eat. Nights I rocked 3 cribs on no sleep, singing lullabies I made up through tears. I worked double shifts until my back screamed, walked home in the snow when the car broke down, and stitched the same coat 3 winters in a row. I told them stories of hope when I had none left. I kissed boo-boos while calculating overdue bills. I smiled in front of them and sobbed in the bathroom floor when they slept. Her voice cracked slightly but never broke. And yet, I never stopped loving them. Not once. Even when my body was weak. Even when my spirit was crushed. Even when I thought I would drown in loneliness. I never gave up. Because I was their mother. And no wanna know lie, no silence, no abandonment could take that from me. The audience was no longer just an audience. They were witnesses. Hearts ached, some heads bowed. Alana stepped closer to the edge of the stage. Do you know what it's like to beg someone to believe you? To scream silently inside while they walk away without even looking back? I do. She took a breath, her eyes glistening but unashamed. He left me bleeding with a letter that accused me of betrayal. But the real betrayal wasn't mine. It was his disbelief, his silence. She didn't say Nate's name. She didn't need to. But I'm not here to ruin reputations or reclaim lost years. I'm here to remind you that sometimes the strongest people are the ones you overlook, the ones who smile while breaking, the ones who carry the weight and keep walking anyway. I'm not the victim of this story. I'm the storm that survived the flood. Applause didn't come yet, no one wanted to break the gravity. She took one final breath, then said with piercing honesty, I begged you to believe me, her voice quieter now, turned directly to Nate, whose eyes had reddened, hands clutched in fists at his sides, and you walked away. But I never stopped being their mother. Not for a second, and I will never stop. A single tear slid down her cheek, catching in the corner of her jaw, and she let it fall freely, not out of weakness, but in honor of every tear she had swallowed until this moment. Then came the thunder applause like a wave, surging from every side of the ballroom. It wasn't polite, it was raw, emotional, human. Nate bowed his head, not in shame, but in recognition. This was her story now, and he was only a shadow in its past. Alana turned and walked off the stagino slowly, not hurried but with the poise of a woman who had faced the fire and walked out glowing. As she reached her children, Amari threw her arms around her waist. Isaac whispered, You were amazing, and Elias beamed like he finally understood why his mom always held her head high. Alana closed her eyes and whispered into Amari's hair, They know now, the whole world knows, and we're not hiding anymore. As the echoes of the applause faded and the air thickened with unspoken emotion, Nate stood frozen at the edge of the stage, watching the woman he had once loved more than his own breath disappear into the embrace of their children, who had grown without his touch, without his voice, without his name, and he could no longer feel the floor beneath his feet. Only the ache of everything he had lost know, everything he had never even known he had. His lips parted to speak, but the words caught like thorns in his throat, choked by the weight of years wasted and truth denied. He stepped forward slowly, cautiously, as though approaching a sacred altar, his heart in tatters and his soul stripped bare. Alana, he whispered, voice splintered. Please, But she didn't turn around, she was kneeling now, fixing Elias's tiny collar, kissing Amari's temple, brushing Isaac's curls with motherly tenderness that told the world they had never gone a single day unloved. Nate swallowed hard and dropped to his knees right there in front of them, not as a millionaire, not as a CEO, but as a man broken open by the eyes of 3 small faces that stared at him like a riddle they had never been given time to solve. I don't deserve to be standing here, he said softly, eyes locked on the ground. But I'm begging anyway, not for forgiveness, for a chance to try. Alana turned then, slowly, eyes guarded but glistening, the shield of a woman who had rebuilt her life now, facing the man who shattered it. Before she could speak, Elias stepped forward not with fear, but with fascination. Why did you leave us? The boy asked, his voice innocent and sharp as glass. Nate looked up, tears finally spilling, hands trembling as he replied, I didn't know you existed, and when I had the chance to ask questions, I believed lies instead. I was weak, and I hurt your mother, and I missed the greatest years of my life. The room had grown quiet again, not out of pity, but reverence. Isaac stood beside his brother now, staring at Nate with a quiet intensity that made the man's chest cave inward. "Do you even know our birthdays?" the boy asked, chin lifted. Nate's face crumpled. "No," he admitted, voice cracking. "But if you'll let me, I'll celebrate every one of them for the rest of my life." Amari stayed in Alana's arms, eyes narrowed slightly, arms crossed with a protectiveness that made Nate's heart fracture all over again. "You made Mommy cry," she said. "A lot." Nate nodded. "I know," he whispered, "and I hate myself for it." Silence. Then Elias did something that made Nate stop breathing. The boy stepped forward and hugged him. Small arms wrapped around his neck like forgiveness itself, untainted by bitterness, and Nate let out a sound between a sob and a gasp, his knees buckling beneath the pressure of it. He clutched his son like he'd found air in a drowning sea, his tears falling freely, staining the boy's jacket. "I thought I lost everything," he whispered shakily, "but I never knew what everything looked like until now." Isaac followed, slower, more hesitant, but his little fingers brushed Nate's shoulder and lingered, and that simple gesture broke something sacred inside Nate. "We don't know you," Isaac murmured, "but maybe we could." Nate nodded, tears streaming, unable to speak, and then, to his disbelief, Amari walked closer just 2 small steps. "You have to earn it," she said, lifting one finger like a warning. "You don't get to walk in just because you're here now." Nate gave a teary, broken smile. "That's fair. That's more than fair. I'll wait. I'll work. I'll show you who I should have been." Alana watched in silence, her throat tight, her eyes burning, because for all the pain he'd caused, this wasn't a man lying anymore. This was a man unraveling at the feet of truth. He looked up at her finally, still on his knees, and said the words that could only come from rock bottom. "I'll never forgive myself for walking away from you, and I know there's nothing I can say that will undo what I did. But Alana, if there's anything left in you that believes people can change, I swear to you, I'll never stop trying to make this right. Not for me, for them, for you." For a long moment, Alana said nothing. The storm inside her was loud, rage, resentment, love, grief, but beneath it all, a trembling whisper of hope she had silenced for years began to stir. She crouched to her children's level and asked gently, "Do you want to give him a chance?" Isaac nodded. Elias hugged Nate tighter. Amari paused, then finally gave the softest nod, almost imperceptible. And Alana looked up, her voice like steel wrapped in silk. "Then prove it, Nate. Show up. Stay. Earn your place. No more speeches. No more stages. Just time, truth, and presence." Nate lowered his head, overcome. "I swear it," he whispered. And in that fragile, holy moment surrounded by the wreckage of the past and the beginning of something newer, Father was born again. The days that followed weren't glamorous, they weren't packed with speeches or gestures meant for applause, but they were real. And in their quiet simplicity, they were more powerful than anything Nate had ever accomplished in his high-rise boardrooms or luxury mansions. Every morning, rain or shine, he showed up sometimes with cinnamon rolls in hand, sometimes with awkward knock-knock jokes, and sometimes with nothing but the kind of sincerity that couldn't be bought or rehearsed. At first, the triplets didn't know what to make of his return, their little hearts cautiously opening 1 inch at a time, watching him with wide eyes as he learned how to braid Amari's hair without making her cry, or helped Elias build Lego towers, only to pretend to lose when they collapsed, or sat beside Isaac in total silence while he colored quietly, never pushing, only waiting. He didn't try to fill the space as their dad, he simply wanted to be there, to earn it. And it was in those in-between moments, slicing apples for snacks, folding laundry beside Alana on the living room floor, carrying sleeping children from the car, that something fragile and beautiful began to bloom. He started leaving notes on the fridge, silly doodles for the kids. But once, Alana found one just for her. "Thank you for keeping their hearts kind when I didn't deserve a place in them." She didn't respond, but she folded it gently and tucked it into her journal. He brought tools to fix the broken faucet she'd been wrestling with for weeks, and never bragged about it. When the kids got the flu, he showed up with medicine, soup, and a sleeping bag, offering to stay nearby in case she needed help during the night shift and, for the first time in 5 years, she said yes. They began talking again, not just about the children, but about music, about books, about the fear of losing yourself when the world goes dark. Nate cried one evening on the porch as he told her about the first time he saw a little girl in the park who looked like Amari and how he'd broken down in his car afterward. Alana listened, arms crossed, heart split between anger and ache, but she didn't walk away. One night, under soft lantern light strung across her tiny backyard, after watching the kids chase fireflies barefoot on grass that glowed like magic, Nate stood beside her with a ring knot in a velvet box, but wrapped in a napkin their daughter had drawn hearts on. His hands trembled, but his eyes were steady, not desperate, just full of truth. "You gave me children," he said, voice low, reverent. "Let me earn your heart back." The world seemed to hold its breath. Alana stared at him, not as the man who left her, but as the man who had crawled back piece by piece, with perfection, but with intention. She didn't speak right away, and her silence stretched like the last note of a symphony. But when she did, it was soft and solid. "I don't know if I can say yes yet," she whispered, the corners of her lips curling into something quiet and strong. "But let's start with forgiveness." And in that moment, it didn't feel like the end of anything. It felt like the beginning of something honest, something sacred, something earned. Behind them, Elias shouted, "Daddy, come race." And without hesitation, Nate kicked off his shoes and ran into the dusk with laughter bubbling from his chest like a boy rediscovering childhood. Alana stood there, watching, arms wrapped around herself, not in fear, but in peace. The air was damp, with the smell of rain that had just passed, and in the distance, a rainbow arched like a silent promise across the sky, not of perfection, but of possibility. For the first time in years, she allowed herself to hope without pain. Redemption wasn't a moment, it was a collection of small choices stacked like bricks. And today, they had laid a new foundation. The children shrieked with joy. Nate stumbled and let them win. Alana smiled, just watching. Not because she'd forgotten the past, but because she was brave enough to believe in the future, and somewhere deep in the silence of her heart, a door creaked open, not wide, but enough to let the light back in.